show starts in 10.
Is there ever a legitimate reason to simply ghost your parents?
9.
In his power to alienate my sons against me.
8.
I want to go no contact.
7.
As a new mom, I kept a vigilant eye on you, except for the time that you almost choked to death on a candy wrapper.
6.
Like, it's all the parents' fault.
5.
Gen Y and Gen Z tend to be snowflakier than previous generations.
4.
Topic is one today that's going to probably touch a lot of hearts.
3.
We were shocked.
2.
Your grandfather is a QAnon supporting nutjob, and I can't have him in our lives anymore.
1.
All right, let's do this.
Go.
Hello, babies, and welcome back to my channel. I'm David, you're David, we're all David, and welcome to Estranged Adult Children. This is quite a very specific topic, and you know what, if you clicked on this, you might be a little bit morbidly curious, and I don't blame you for that. Maybe you're a parent who is estranged from your child, maybe you are a child who is estranged from your parent. I'm glad that you're here. So here's what's on the agenda today, besties. First, we are going to look at a story that I came across on TikTok. The account is called The Fired Mom. You know, you build it context. You grew up in the context
of all in which you live and what came before you.
It was about 1 a.m. and I was laying in bed and I just could not stop doom scrolling through this account. I started to look into this culture, this idea of estranged adult children, and there is so much content online for estranged adult parents, like estranged parents making content for other estranged parents. So today we're going to take a deep dive into this idea of estranged adult children. Now we're going to start with the fired mom, then we're going to have a look at what a few of the academics have to say in this space. We're not looking for one final and conclusion for an answer, but I am going to present you a lot of information that I found because I listened to a staunch amount of estranged adult children content, mostly made by the estranged parents. So with that being said, before we get into this here, besties, please do not go leave hate to any of the individuals that we're going to be looking at here in these videos.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, David.
We don't know these people. We don't care about these people. They are serving as an example so we can start this conversation, because I think being an estranged adult child is something that a lot of us go through, but not necessarily something that a lot of us talk about. So if you stick around, you can expect to laugh, learn, and maybe get a little bit emotional, because a lot of these stories are inherently emotional.
Is it blood?
If you love the sound of my voice, consider subscribing. Leave a like at the end of the video if you liked it. Without further ado, we're going to look at the fired mom here on TikTok. We're going to start here by looking at part 1 and part 2 of why this fired mom has gotten no contact with one or more of her children. Let's see what's going on here. You think you fell out of a
Coconut tree?
So why are my children no contact? My children are no contact because of a multitude of factors. Me being the primary character, I'm the one that they're no contact with. My life was one filled with trauma and was not one that was addressed with therapy. And when I had met their father, I was in a fast forward mode, trying to achieve everything that I needed to achieve before I reached the age of 29, because I didn't think I would even live to be 29.
Right, even before we get into this, please don't go send this person hate. I say this in my other videos called Dismantling Hate, where we look at alt-right stuff, anti-queer content. We do not have Michelle Obama's arms, but we do have her attitude, and when they go low, we go high. Going to this person's page and leaving them hateful messages or hateful comments doesn't actually help anybody. I do believe, and I feel this deep in my soul, that this person thinks that they are doing what is right. All of the sirens out there, do you mind? This person in this moment is doing the best that they can. That does not mean that they will not be held accountable for their actions.
Snap, David.
I don't think that this person in particular is malicious in intent. That being said, you starting your explanation of why your children are no contact with you saying that you went through a lot of trauma in your childhood, hey, a traumatic childhood is valid. It might be alluding to a bigger issue here. It's giving the okay, so to make a long story short, 7th grade, I showed an aptitude for the clarinet. Then, no, you're going back too far. You are building this victim mentality that many of these people who are estranged from their adult children pigeonhole themselves into, because you being the victim sometimes could be easier than addressing the actual issue. I'm not sorry that this video is going to be 14 hours long, because look, this is a 10-minute video already. If you are a person who is estranged from a parent, if you are a parent who is estranged from a child, I'm so glad you're here, because I don't want to alienate either side of you. I mean, ultimately, I think you need to go to therapy. Either way, I think you need to go to therapy. Even if you're not estranged from a parent, you should be in therapy. Go to therapy. And that's how David sees it. All right, let's keep going.
You live a life of trauma. And even though there were red flags to his narcissistic tendencies, I did not have the strength or the self-esteem to be able to stand up to those red flags and end things, even though I did try to end things when we were engaged. So we got married and we had our first child. I actually left him before I found out I was pregnant with my first son. But once I found out I was pregnant, I was like, this is it. This is my life. I need to make it work. And so I did everything I could to make it work. And it wasn't until my youngest was not quite 2. And there were many times between that first time I left, or the second time I tried to end things, and the time my son was almost 2, that I had tried to end things, but something happened that I was like, no more. And it takes 7 to 8 times for someone who was abused to leave their abuser, and it was the 8th and final time. I did not realize that when you leave or when you discard a narc, that they will do everything in their power to make your life hell. And that was exactly what he did. And, he did everything.
First of all, she's speaking in very absolute language. I was going to say she's not a content creator, but she fully is a content creator. If you're a content creator, you need to be using protective language. You can tell because I've been doing it in this entire video. No one statement is true for an entire group of people, and you making those big blanket statements alienates people right away. If you're a parent here who's estranged from your child, I can't say anything that's 100% going to be true for you other than the fact that you've now self-identified as estranged from your child.
What's your point, David?
You can't make these huge generalizations of like, this is what happens when you discard a narc. It takes 7 to 8 times to leave an abuser. Like, that can happen. It can take that many times. Speaking in these absolutes is alienating, and that doesn't create a good relationship between you, the content creator, and your viewers.
In his power to alienate my sons against me, but that's just part of the story. The other part of the story is,
if anybody in the world has the power to alienate somebody from you, they were already thinking about it in most cases. Is it possible for somebody to be manipulated into going no contact with a parent against their will in this same way, or like being manipulated beyond a reasonable doubt like she's saying? Yes, of course, that's a possibility. I'm so fascinated with all of this. It's just so interesting.
My being raised in a narcissistic family cult by a silent generation cult leader with boomer uncles. My upbringing was very strict, and so I was indeed very strict with my...
It's all this language, right? Boomer uncles, like narcissistic cult. You can have narcissistic tendencies and not be a narcissist. People throw these terms around quite loosely, and then these words start to lose their meaning. Like, so few people are actually considered narcissist, like designated by the DSM-5. Is it possible that she grew up around a cult leader? Absolutely. But would it be an easy thing to exaggerate in order to get your point across in a more meaningful, powerful way? Also, yes. So you need to be critical of what people are saying to you in order to manipulate you. I'm not saying she's a liar. She could be a liar. She could not be a liar. I don't know. But you need to be thinking of that.
I did choose my battles. I loved them very much. I don't think they doubted how much I loved them. But I did not have a typical family unit to model, to understand how to be a loving parent. That's for sure. The teen years became very difficult. I had tried to get therapy for my oldest multiple times when things were, showing that he needed therapy, and he would not open up to therapy. And so I tried the tough love, because tough love is what the parenting style was at the time when kids were acting out. And so that was very tough on him. And it was difficult. I tried to work with their father, who would always say, I'll talk with them. And that's what he did. He talked with them. They saw him every other weekend, and that was about it. At this point, when they were teenagers, my body started to implode with one chronic illness diagnosis after the other, and my rare disease symptoms started, but my doctors were stumped. So it was very difficult for my kids, because when I wasn't working, I was sleeping, I was resting. And so a lot of things came down on their shoulders, to help around the house and stuff like that. Their teen years probably were not fun and were filled with worry, I'm sure. So as they started to leave the nest, my oldest left very early. He left very early, and there was nothing I could do to keep him at home. When he wanted to come home, when he realized having heat and having hot water were important, of course, I let him come home. It was, they were difficult years. They were very difficult years, and I made lots of mistakes. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. I thought that modeling not drinking, modeling not smoking, modeling not using drugs was what my kids would need. But that they needed more than that. So, eventually one by one, they started off into the world and each had their own ways and, challenges. And I tried to support them the best I could with what I knew. And I made mistakes. When my oldest met his wife, she was very complimentary to me as a mom, saying I did such a great job raising my son, thanked me because he was such a wonderful guy and treated her so well. I should have at that point said, well, I wasn't the perfect mother. I should have at that point, brought up the fact that I made many mistakes. Okay. I didn't. I was raised to not bring up horrible things when something good is said. I wish that I had, because that would have opened some conversations at that point and allowed me to apologize to my son then. Things with my middle son were difficult health-wise, and I, we had some challenges where, I had to take him to the VA hospital when he was literally screaming in pain, and he was very, very, very sick. And, I was happy to take him to the hospital. I wished he wasn't, as sick as he was. And when he was going through treatment for what had happened, it was related to having mono when he was in high school. I was trying to get him to advocate for himself, and I was very forceful about that, and that caused him to go about 6 weeks without speaking with me. And I learned to be much less forceful about trying to get them to advocate for themselves, that they needed to make their own decisions. My youngest and I never really...
I think it's important to mention here that it's not her responsibility to share all of the details. With the story that she just said, we don't have enough details to make an informed judgment. What does that look like, being forceful for him to advocate for himself? There's an innumerable amount of ways that could manifest in real life, so we don't know what actually happened there. But it's also not her responsibility to share it. Well, I guess, is it? Because she's making this about her content. Also, the VA hospital, I don't know what that means. Maybe that's a location, like a VA is like the town name or whatever. If you know what VA means, let me know in the comments. Take a deep breath with me. We got a few more minutes of this. We'll talk at the end and then we'll see, I guess, part 2. Oh my God.
These headbutting issues, honestly. My youngest did go to a boarding school for students that were gifted from his sophomore, junior, and senior years. And I advocated for that. His father did not support that. His father did not pay anything towards the tuition for that. And it was where my son needed to go because he's gifted. And, his response to his brothers having issues with me was that his child, his memories didn't reflect their memories. And he felt it was because he didn't stay home when he was in high school. So, their young adulthood was challenging in different ways. And I think one of the biggest ways was that I had never had a parent as a young adult. I separated from my foster family when I was 18. There was nothing they could tell me about what to do or who to see or anything about my life at that point, even if they tried.
I think this is a really important part of this conversation as well, because we want to move away from the shame model. We don't want to shame this person. I'm very mindful here of putting the appropriate amount of responsibility on these kinds of people, and not in like these kinds of people, but I think a lot of these older generations, like if you think about those older people in your life, like the trauma that they went through, there is an incredible amount of trauma that are older. I just think of Jamie Lee Curtis, intergenerational trauma.
Generational trauma.
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 But so many of these people went through incredible amounts of
trauma.
They were not in a position to effectively raise a family, but they did because that is what was expected of them from our societal roles. All of these things, are they inherently the fault of this person? If this person had an upbringing that was void of
trauma,
would the situation have turned out this way? I don't believe so. I have no way of knowing that if this person had an upbringing that was different, their relationship with their children would have been different as well. However, your children did not ask to be born. And if you are having children, you have a responsibility to create an environment that is conducive to their positive experience in the world as a human being. And if you fail to meet those standards, and if you fail to thereafter take radical responsibility for the ways in which you did not live up to those standards, they probably will go no contact with you. Their experience in the here and now and the ways in which you behaved is very real to them and you need to take responsibility. So if you're like this woman and it's what caused your sons to go no contact, and you're going back into the ways of which you were treated when you were young and potentially in an abusive way, it's conducive to the conversation if you're creating content about it. But I have a feeling that if these sons tried to talk to this parent, that she would then bring up all of that stuff of saying, well, like, I didn't know what to do because I wasn't shown that either. Cool, that's valid, but that's also not their problem. You know what I mean? Like, we're holding space for empathy, but we still need to be critical here, because if both of your sons went no contact, like, who's the common denominator here? Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. This is fascinating.
So I was very grateful to my son's girlfriend, because she really made a change in his life and he started making some really good decisions. And I was happy to celebrate in that and to see my son as I knew he could be. But they took that as me being obsessed with him. I was just happy to see him being such a great guy. So when, the horrible timing of events was that I suffered a brain injury. I had no one that I was living with, and the brain injury was a very severe concussion that I was knocked out for over 45 minutes. It was a second concussion within a year. A second concussion within a year can kill you, and it almost killed me. Healing from that concussion took a very long time, and it took a lot of medical intervention, and it caused me to have a lot of behaviors that were very difficult for my oldest and his wife while they were expecting my granddaughter. It was difficult for them to process, and again, living alone, there was nobody to intercede. So when I went into a mania and a psychosis that made things even worse, I do believe that it went right down the pathway of their father, telling them that, your mother's crazy anyway. Because when I would set boundaries when they were teenagers, they would say, Mom, you're crazy, you're just crazy. And the way they said it, I knew it came from someplace else. So as I was healing from the psychosis, which causes brain damage, as well as my severe concussion, it was extremely difficult. And my son and his wife tried to give me a second chance. I was undiagnosed at the time with PTSD, and it was thanks to my son telling me to have my therapist look at our communication that it brought about the PTSD diagnosis. This is going to have to go into a second video about why I'm estranged, but I think it's important. So that's the rundown of why I'm estranged.
I mean, it's not really the rundown. And if you can't explain why you are estranged from your 2 adult children in 10 minutes, girl, come on. I get it though. I'm a talker. There's a lot of buzzwords here. Mania, psychosis, PTSD, all of those things might have been diagnosed from a medical professional, I understand, but a lot of these times these terms are thrown around. Having a concussion and having a traumatic brain injury can in fact change your behavior, and it can change your personality, and we've seen that. I don't know what the middle ground is, right? Like, if I was married and my wife had a TBI and then she started to become abusive to me and there was no way of like getting out of that cycle, I would probably divorce her. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you? I don't know. Is it literally till death do us part with parents as well? If I was becoming abusive to my mother, I would want her to say, get out of my house, Mary, right? Am I crazy? Am I the crazy one? Let me know in the comments. I don't necessarily know if there's a right answer here. All right, so we're going to watch the part 2 here, and then we're going to move on to what the experts are saying in the field of estranged adult children. So let's see how she's going to wrap up this story.
This is part 2 of answering this question of why my sons are no contact, especially if you are a new follower. Tried to get into one video, but the first video you must go back and watch before watching this one. That is setting up everything about why things went the way they did. All has to do with me. Most of it. Here we go for part 2. So when I left off, I mentioned messages and PTSD diagnosis after my son and daughter-in-law gave me a second chance. But I did not mention the first situation because I was trying to fit it all into 10 minutes. The first situation of no contact happened quite shockingly to me after I held my granddaughter the first time when she was a few months old. You have to remember this is during COVID, like before any vaccines were available, and doctors were very cautious with newborns. And my son and daughter-in-law are great parents, and they followed the doctor's orders. So it was a porch visit, and my daughter-in-law was very forlorn looking the whole entire time. And I said something trying to lighten the mood. I said, because many pictures that my ex's wife had posted had comments saying, my gosh, she looks just like her father. And so I said, without thinking, now this is not an excuse, this is a reality, I was on lots of psychiatric meds from my mania, from my psychosis, that were keeping my brain down. Like, it slows your brain down from thinking, it slows it from processing really fast. I was on a boatload of meds. I said, and I said it in a joking way, I said, does it piss you off that everyone says that she looks just like her dad? My son's response to me saying that on the porch was, oh, she's too pretty to look like me. And my daughter-in-law didn't really respond, but the minute I said it, I also said, wow, that didn't sound right. I'm so sorry. I should not have even said that. That was my response the minute I said it. And I took a family picture of them before they went back inside and before I left. Then when I got in the car, I sent another apology to my son through Messenger. That was when my son came back at me very upset that I even said that, because my daughter-in-law was adopted, and me being raised in foster care, I should have understood how much she wanted to have a child that looked like her. And honestly, with where my brain was at, post-psychosis, post-concussion, still trying to heal from those, and both of those take sometimes upwards of 2 years to heal from, and I was healing from both of them together. I did not take those into consideration. I had a friend who was adopted, who I remember taking all of that into consideration when her first baby was born. So that's on me. I did not take that into consideration, but I did apologize the minute those words came out of my mouth. You know, later on, I learned that the reason she was still so forlorn with me is I still had not apologized to her directly for my behavior during my mania and my psychosis. I had apologized to my son multiple times.
So one comment does not estrangement make, but even she's admitting now that she had behavior towards the daughter-in-law that was unsavory or not nice because of her mania and her psychosis. Your mania and your psychosis are valid, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be held accountable for the behavior that you perpetuated against other people while that was happening. It's not necessarily something that you can control, but you still need to be held accountable. I think we're missing part of the story here, which is completely valid because she doesn't have to share all the parts of her story, but it's kind of like manipulating by omission. She's weaponizing this omission from telling her side of the story here. I'd be really fascinated to hear her daughter-in-law or her son's perspective, but I also hope that her daughter-in-law and son are not watching this content and that they are in fact no contact with her. And it often is shocking to the parent that gets that no contact order from the child, which is so interesting to me because it might also show that these parents are not as plugged in or maybe paying attention as to the emotional state and well-being of their children, because they themselves are probably not emotionally available. So how can they recognize that in others, which is usually a part of the puzzle that is pretty consistent among estranged parents. Yeah, wow. All right, let's keep going.
So as a result of that comment, that was when my first no contact happened with my son.
It's not a result of that comment. That comment may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but that's not the only reason. We are missing context here. It doesn't make sense. And what does Judge Judy say? If something doesn't make sense, it's probably not true. And if you're sharing your story and attempting to get people to be on your side, which is what I'm gleaning from this, she wants people to identify with her position so she can be reinforced that she did the right thing, which isn't necessarily appropriate, I believe, in this context, and will not give her what she wants. Allegedly is having a good relationship with her boys. It's definitely not coming off that way.
My daughter-in-law, and I lost all access for the next 5 months, and I was devastated, and I did everything wrong. I sent gifts, I sent cards, I sent emails, I sent cards to my daughter-in-law. I still at this point was not looking at anything to do with no contact online. I had no idea about anything, none of this. I had no clue. I had no clue about any behaviors that adult children would do if they thought that their parent was a narc. I had no idea. Fortunately, 5 months in, my son did reach out and said that they would like to meet with me and sit down and discuss some things, and so I agreed, and they offered meeting with me at a public park, and I thought that they were doing that so that I wouldn't be able to see my granddaughter, that they would leave her with a babysitter at their home, and I was very surprised to find that they had my granddaughter with them. But I realized once I started investigating in the no contact world that they do that so that the the just no mother-in-law or the narcissistic parent won't, throw a fit or make a scene. I've never made a scene with either of them. There was one scene I made with my son when he had a friend over.
Okay, so immediately the doublespeak, right? I've never made a scene, except for this one time I made a scene. And I'm not like trying to attack her or be like dismissive of her experience, but like you just said you never made a scene and then immediately followed it up with this one time I made a scene. So if you made it once, like people make scenes. I get it, girl. I've made scenes before. But also like in a different you grew up
In the context
of all that came before you. And like meeting at a public park, not only for this idea of like you can't make a scene in a public park, but you can also just leave. If you invite somebody into your home that you're not sure how it's going to go, you're then left in a compromising position. If this person is making a scene in your home, you have to attempt to get them out. You can leave from a public park, so it's kind of safe for everybody involved for it to be in a public place. So I understand why.
In the basement when he, was still quite young. That was the only scene I made with him, with someone, but never made a scene with the two of them. But I was horrified when I saw that was why they met with me in a public place. We set boundaries, they set boundaries. I did set a boundary that I would stop reaching out first. I would let them reach out first. And because I had been so excited to be a grandmother, I was so excited to have another relative, to have a female blood relative. I had no other female blood relatives on the planet other than my granddaughter. Being an orphan is a very traumatizing experience. Adult children will say they orphan themselves. No, you still have those relatives are still on the planet. You are an orphan when there are no other blood relatives on the planet. That's when you are an orphan. However, I was undiagnosed with PTSD. My therapist did not see the signs, even though he heard the signs. And, because I would leave the visits with my granddaughter just shook, just waiting for them to stop me from visiting with her. I was worried that everything I said was going to be held against me. I was worried I was going to say the wrong thing. I was worried that I was going to say something that was going to upset them. So I would, panic and think when I left that I was just going to get a message that I had done something wrong.
This experience is valid, but this experience also equates to you having a traumatic past. It's anxiety, right? So this is something that needs to be treated with a medical professional, not necessarily placed on the onus of your son and your daughter-in-law and your granddaughter. So this experience is valid, but it's not only valid for your son to make concessions for your poor behavior, right? Your anxiety is valid, but the way that other people make concessions for you is not. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't. That's okay. That's okay.
I would share this with my therapist and he still didn't see it. He would try to tell me that things were going well. Then I had some trauma come back into my life after Christmas when my dog started showing signs of a brain tumor, which he did indeed have. And still being unhealed completely from my psychosis and my brain injury. This is not an excuse. This is a reality that I was living.
That's a line that she said now a couple of times. This is not an excuse. This is reality. I don't know about that. I don't know about that phrase. I don't think that's a good phrase. It sounds like an excuse because you're saying it in an excusatory tone. Also, how would you know that your dog is exhibiting signs of a brain tumor? Like, that's all allegedly. She might know a lot of things about dogs in their brains, Just like I know a lot about humans in their brains. If you don't know, I'm studying for a Master's of Education with a specialization in neuroscience. So.
Oh my God, who hasn't, David?
That made my emotional liability more difficult. Not having someone that I lived with to help me to, monitor myself as far as my emotions, my emotional liability was concerned.
Again, it's all valid. That's not your son's responsibility.
I reached out to my son first in regards to my granddaughter, which was a boundary that I had created, and he didn't take well to that. Instead of not responding to his harsh response to that about the granddaughter, I responded, and I shouldn't have. I should have walked away. So from that point forward, I did everything I shouldn't have done. And it truly wasn't until I did everything that I shouldn't have done, which was trying to justify, trying to explain, trying to stop the horror from happening that was happening right before my eyes in real time, that I finally started looking into, adult-child estrangement. And I realized, Jesus, I'm doing everything wrong, but I'd already done it all wrong. The other thing I did wrong is I involved my middle son in conversations in regards to his brother. And when I told my middle son that I had sent a book to my granddaughter, which was a book about Noodle, and I tried to cancel the order because I realized, damn, I shouldn't have done that. I couldn't cancel the order, so I involved telling my middle son, please let my oldest know that I tried to cancel the order and I couldn't. It led to my middle son being very authoritarian to me about the situation, which I did not take very well, and that led to our estrangement. And then along came, my youngest had been very, very, very low contact after his middle brother moved very close to him. And when I started doing the TikToks, my youngest was not upset about the TikToks. He was upset that I was not taking accountability.
You're still here not taking accountability. Okay, so I'm not completely trained in facial expressions, but I know contempt when I see it. It's that upside down kidney bean where both of these sides of your mouth are pulled down. I'm not quite doing it. That looks more sad. Also, I'd be upset with the TikToks. Yeah, if my mother was out here airing my dirty laundry while also trying to get me to not be no contact with her, that would definitely motivate me to solidify that no contact order. Okay, 30 seconds left. Let's go.
That's when he said he was going no contact. And that's when he said that I was emotionally abusive in their childhood. And he said that if I harassed his father, that he would never speak to me ever again. That is not a boundary for him. That's a threat. That's where I say it's a threat. And harassing his father is me being truthful about the abuse that I received from his dad. So that's my story in 20 minutes.
If you do go through the comments, it is pretty balanced on all of these videos between people who both are identifying with this person, because I think there's probably a larger amount of estranged parents out there in the world than we think there are. I think it's probably a pretty consistent experience. I'm personally part of the queer community, so I know that there's a higher amount of parental estrangement within the queer community. So there's a striking amount of people in my life that are estranged from their parents, but I don't think that's a random sample of the population as a whole. Okay, so that's basically the gist of the fired mom, right? As I started to dig farther and farther into different creator accounts of estranged parents, kind of similar to her, there are a lot of similarities and there are through lines that we can see here. And even the qualities that I've seen with the people in my life who are estranged from their parents as adults, there are a lot of similarities there as well. You are picking up on them most likely as well if you're paying attention. Now, I started to dig a little bit more into this because this is not a professional person. This is literally just some lady who started a TikTok account. But I wanted to get into, what are the professionals saying? Are there professionals in this space who are leveraging their voice in the online space in order to help either the estranged parents or the estranged children? Are there people in this space who are actually creating that content? And the answer is yes. So I have a few people to introduce to you right now. All right, so next up, we are going to look at a YouTube account called the Reconnection Club. Now, this is a person by the name of Tina Gilbertson, and she has a podcast specifically for parents who are estranged from their adult children. Now, I believe this person is actually a therapist and is speaking from an amount of education, which is good. That's what we want. We don't want just somebody out here on TikTok sharing their story as if she is providing clinical help to people who are watching her videos, because ultimately she is not. Sharing your story can be valid and cathartic and help other people, but it is not a prescription for anybody else who is going through the same situation. So I would say that same thing to you right now. You watching this video right now, I can't inform anything about the way that you are going to live your life. So do not take any part of this video as advice. It is entertainment. You might use it as a jumping off point for your own research, which I think would be great, but ultimately at the end of the day, you need to be responsible and you need to take all of the information that you find online with a grain of salt. Now, something that came up time and time again as I was watching these estranged parents turned content creators, what a sentence that was. They perpetuated this idea of estranged adult children as a trend. All of these children are estranging their parents because it's the cool thing to do. And if you don't agree on anything, you can just throw out relationships because blood means nothing anymore. And where's the honor thy father and thy mother and that sky daddy stuff, right? Once we start getting into religion, this gets pretty messy.
I'm sorry, but I can't be with someone who doesn't believe in Jesus.
I don't care if you believe in sky daddy, God, Jeebus, the flying spaghetti monster. It does not matter who you believe in, but ultimately when you start to use that as a weapon, specifically through the monetization of religion in order to take advantage of the vulnerabilities of people in order to get their money, That's not good. Anyway, we're going to listen to Tina talk about this idea of estrangement as a trend and see if it actually is in fact trending. There's no video for this, but there is in fact her picture, and so I'll put up here what she shows on her YouTube video.
Welcome to the Reconnection Club Podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. More and more parents of estranged adult children are talking about something that discourages and frightens them, unnecessarily in my opinion, and it's the idea of estrangement from family becoming a trend in our society. And the reason I want to talk about that is I want to provide you with some positive thoughts to keep in mind that are both soothing and accurate, to try to help you stay calm and strong and keep your eye on the ball instead of getting not only distracted, but scared and hurt. If you want to think of estrangement as a growing trend because it helps you feel less alone, you're allowed to want to not feel alone with this incredibly painful experience. Just acknowledge to yourself that that's what you're seeking. But if your thoughts are consumed with worry and fear about estrangement becoming a trend, that's what I hope to be able to help you with today. First of all, as of this recording, I don't think we have sufficient data to know whether estrangement is in fact a growing trend. Lots of people say that it is, but just saying something doesn't make it so. As far as I know, we don't have sufficient evidence yet to answer that question. But if estrangement is growing, then that is a description of something that's happening in our society. It's not a prescription for your child to cut you out of her life. In other words, if it is a trend, it doesn't matter for our purposes because it isn't causing your child's estrangement.
This is Tina Gilbertson. I really appreciate her perspective on just this one. There are about 200 episodes here of this podcast. They're all pretty short. They're pretty consumable. They're between 10 and 20 minutes. So if you are an estranged parent, I think this might be a really good resource for you to be listening to. She is somebody who is a certified professional. I've listened to about 10 of these episodes, and I believe all of the advice that she's giving here is pretty good and pretty positive. So if you're somebody who is looking for those resources, if you are an estranged parent and if your ultimate goal is to not be estranged from your children anymore, you need to be listening to people whose goal is also to be a part of their children's lives. If you are an estranged parent and your ultimate goal is to be able to have a good, well-rounded relationship with your children, you should not be taking advice from people who are also estranged from their children, because essentially, they're going to be in the same position that you are, with, of course, some variances. You should be listening to professionals. I am not a professional, but this woman is. So if you're interested, go and watch those. They're really consumable. I really highly recommend them. That's the extent that we're going to talk about Tina Gilbertson, but there are professionals out here who are coming at this from a therapeutic perspective and doing things in a way that is conducive to you getting a relationship back with your estranged adult child, if that is your goal. So the next professional that we're going to talk here is from the creator called 60andMe. This creator was referenced on the Fired Moms page, which was interesting. So this creator called 60andMe is not somebody who solely focuses on estranged adult children, but they do talk about the loneliness specifically of women who are 60 years of age and older. And I think this is a really important conversation. I think it's really important that this content is out there because I think loneliness is very detrimental to our mental health. And I think older people being lonely is something that should be paid attention to. And I think the support for these lonely older people should be attended to. It should be acknowledged, and there should be help out there for that. And it's not just older people that are lonely, but it's nice to hear things from somebody who shares the same perspective as you, or somebody who looks like you or is the same age as you. So I think this content being out here is amazing for people who need it. We're going to take a look at a few minutes of this video called How to Deal with an Estranged Adult Child. Practical advice that actually helps. I don't know the qualifications of this person. Maybe she'll explain it. Let's see what she has to say and then we'll talk about it.
Hi everyone, it's Margaret Manning here with 60andMe. Thanks for being here today. I hope that you're doing okay. Topic is one today that's going to probably touch a lot of hearts, and it's a continuation really of a conversation that we've been having for the last year. It's a story about estranged adult children. That is a situation where you are no longer in touch with your adult children. The number of women in our community who are dealing with an estranged child situation. It's really heartbreaking. And I want to talk to you today, though, about how to deal with it. There are lots of support groups now because this is not an isolated issue. So when I say estranged adult child,
I'm going to pause her right here because it's something that I just thought about. Isn't it interesting that the majority of this content is either produced by or made for women? There is one man, there is a man who wrote a book, and we're going to get into him. His perspective is very problematic, but we'll get into that. When you think about being estranged from a parent, I would think there are a lot more men who are estranged from their children than there are women, but perhaps the women actually care. Is that the difference here? Maybe that's the difference. Is that sexist of me to say? Let's keep going.
Apart from them, you don't know where they are. Do they not ever contact you? Do they keep your grandchildren away from you? Are you just not getting any response at all to outreach that you might be making to them? I really appreciate the people that are struggling along the whole spectrum, because everything is, we're representing women here that have just recently had this experience, some trigger event has happened, something occurred that just broke the relationship, or women that have been in this situation for many years and who cry every single day because they are not connected to their adult children, or their adult children, for whatever reason, have left them, have abandoned them. They are estranged. So that word estranged, even the word estranged, is harsh to me. It feels like it's just such a separation, like a cut. And so it is a word, however, that defines this category. Estranged mamas, you're not alone. And if that gives you any strength or any sense that, there's a whole sense, an argument about, how these things happen, how children just make the decision to move away from their parents, why they do it. It's, there's not one easy reason. And a lot of young people join the conversation too, saying that there were very valid issues that they can identify. So it's complex. What to do, or how to handle it. And there's 5. First is get support. I mean, it could be as simple as just being here, being with other women who are dealing with the same situation, but get some support. Do not try to do this alone. And there are lots of online groups, there's books that you can read, and that word support just has, again, it's a spectrum, but get some support. The second thing is, don't cut off.
Like, it is important that you get support, but like, for example, the book that we're going to look at here in a few minutes, it matters what kind of support you get, because if you stumble onto the fired mom TikTok page, you're going to be told that you're in the right and your kids have no right to cut you off. And sorry, spoiler, what I believe here is that I think that you can be in charge of your own life enough to be able to choose who you allow into your life. Whether it is right or wrong, good or bad, valid or invalid, it does not matter. At the end of the day, you get the choice. You have the choice of what you are going to do in your own life. And I fundamentally believe that for every single person. If your goal is to foster a relationship with your children, again, don't seek out people who are just going to tell you that you're right. You need to seek out the help of a therapist who can maybe challenge you a little bit. You need to listen to your estranged adult children, because if they are telling you what the issues are and you're just ignoring them, it's not going to get you anywhere. If they're telling you what the issues are, you need to be able to look into these issues, and you need to be able to look into yourself. I think that's what a lot of estranged parents struggle to do, is to be able to turn inward and look at how their behavior not only affected their children in the past, but continues to affect them. It's this idea of continuing the generational pattern, right? Somebody give me Jamie Lee Curtis.
Well, it's nostalgia, but it's nostalgia based on trauma.
A lot of these children, especially when they start to have their own children, the grandchildren, they look at these patterns of behavior and go, no, that's not how it's going to work for me and my kids and my life. So you either have the choice of to get your emotional state together, seek therapy and get help, or you will not be a part of my life anymore. Does that hurt? Yes. That is such a hard thing to hear, and it's such a hard thing to do. But I do believe in some cases it would be the best choice that a parent can make to protect their children, or grandchildren in this case. You don't want to be in an echo chamber, because that's not going to get you what you want. If you want to be right, get into an echo chamber. If you want to have a good relationship with your children, you might have to be challenged a little bit. You might have to be uncomfortable. And that's hard. That's really hard. And I get it. But it's something you need to do if you want to get what you want.
Which leads to the third tip, which is don't feed the anger. Now, a lot of, over the last few years, there's been a lot of separation around, sort of beliefs and values and political lines. And those have split families, and even with the pandemic, split families down the middle around an anger position. Like, I am angry with your decision, or I am angry that you have that.
Don't worry, we're gonna finish this video with that political context. That's how we're gonna end this here. But I'm sorry, if you don't believe in vaccines, nope, we're not getting into it yet. We're gonna wait till the end.
Don't feed that anger. If you disagree, And that's the reason, and you cannot find a way to actually come to some kind of a balanced agreement with each other, that you'll accept each other's differences, then don't feed the anger. Don't keep on niggling. Don't be like a passive aggressive and be nice one minute and then try to hurt them the next day. Honestly, that's going to hurt you more than them. So don't feed the anger is the third one. Listen to your child without defending yourself. If they've got something on their mind, if they actually will speak to you and tell you, why won't you call me? Why won't you connect with me? Why can I not see my grandchildren? And if they're ready to talk, listen. Just listen with an open heart. I know that's hard, especially if there's been, like a lot of anger, maybe violence, maybe, situations where really deep cuts, heart cuts, but if you can, just listen with an open heart. The next thing is, and this is the kind of the circle, focus on yourself and not your child. I know that's almost an impossible thing to suggest if you are just tied up with frustration or anger or grief or sadness or regret or guilt, whatever your feeling is, but you've got to try to focus on yourself. Look, we all make mistakes, right? We all have made mistakes along the way, and I can't remember which article it was that somebody mentioned this, but you said you're sorry 1,000 times to your child. I'm sorry for having done that. I'm sorry that I had this habit that wasn't good for you. I'm sorry that I wasn't there when you got home from school. I'm sorry that I didn't have enough money to buy you whatever you wanted. I'm sorry that I divorced the man that you think is your dad and who you really love, or maybe you're living with. You can say you're sorry for as long as you want, but at some point you should have to say, look, I'm sorry, I've said it 1,000,000 times. I'm now going to live my life joyfully, because that's how I'm going to show to you that I'm the person that I want you to love. I've changed. I'm different.
That's it right there, is that by just saying sorry does not imply that you've changed as well. So I think this might be a bit of a problematic take from our bestie here. You can say sorry all you want, but if sorry is not matched with action, then there's no point in saying sorry. I would rather not hear a single sorry, but see affirmative action that implies that you're sorry. Actions speak louder than words. We know this. But I think some of her takes here might be enabling these people that are facing estrangement with their children as well. Because if you're an estranged child and you're not conversing, if you're not communicating with your parent, which I think is a perfectly valid thing to do, they might be out here consuming content that reinforces the behavior that made you go no contact with them in the first place. It's super interesting to me that you can go out here and find contact that'll push you farther away or bring you closer to the people that ideally you want this relationship with. We're going to leave that there with 60andMe. So now we've heard from 3 different creators on this idea of estrangement. So now we're going to take the time to look at somebody who's a little bit younger. So we're going to look at Dr. Anna Yudin. So she published this video on YouTube called Why Adult Children Go No Contact According to Science. And we're going to see what she has to say.
Welcome. If you don't know me, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology and an author. And today I want to talk about the research on why adult children go no contact or estrange from their parent. There was one qualitative study of 26 participants that found 3 core reasons: abuse, poor parenting, and betrayal. And all of these reasons had kind of like a backdrop of emotional disconnection that existed since childhood, either due to lack of attention or presence by the parent during childhood, or physical distance or absence during childhood, where for some reason the parent had to physically distance themselves, whether it be because of divorce or work or other reasons. And
this is consistent with what we saw with the fired mom, right? Like, there is that emotional distance. We're building this narrative here of why estrangement happens.
The really, really big one was discrepant values or beliefs, which led to emotional disconnection. So there were plenty of other studies that I looked at, aside from the one I'm currently talking about, where participants spoke about needing to hide their true self because they weren't really allowed to be themselves. They were controlled by their parents, who wanted to make sure that they had exactly the same values. And these discrepancies in parent-child values are also shown in the research as being a big predictor of estrangement, so that makes a whole lot of sense. So what seems to be happening is that the parent has one value set, a child has another value set. The parent doesn't accept the child's diverging in terms of values. The child feels unaccepted. The child hides more and more of themselves. There's emotional disconnect between the parent and child for that reason. And as an adult, because of other reasons as well, the child ultimately decides, I want to go no contact.
A lot of these ideas are like a non-starter. Like, if you are racist, that's a non-negotiable for me. You're gone. You're out. I don't think, like, me personally as a person, if you hold these discriminatory values for other people, if you don't believe in vaccines, if you are a conspiracy theorist, if you are a flat earther, like, it sounds hyperbolic and all of that, but It's not. If you are somebody who participates in a culture of discrimination against other people for things that they do not have control over, like homophobia, can you agree to disagree with some of those bigger issues, right? So this idea of differing opinions and differing sets of values is a huge part of this idea of estrangement. So Dr. Anna goes into a lot more detail about estrangement here on her video, so I would recommend, if you are interested, to go and consume the rest of her content. It's very well put together. Again, she is an educated professional, so she is somebody who is positioned to not necessarily give advice, but be able to provide a very balanced and maybe rather nuanced take. I think Dr. Anna is a great resource. Now, so here's the final person that we're going to look at, Dr. Joshua Coleman. I'm going to try really hard to not tell you what I think about this man, and I'm going to let you form your own opinions because you're your own person. Dr. Joshua Coleman wrote the book Rules of Estrangement, and there is an interview that we're going to watch that he is a part of. So we're just quickly going to introduce you to this person here and kind of his vibe here before we get into this interview, because whew, the title of this video is Dr. Joshua Coleman Speaks About the Mentally Ill Estranged Child. As we're watching this, I want you to think about, do you think this man is providing an echo chamber for these estranged parents to reinforce what they already potentially might believe and pushes them farther away from their estranged children? Or do you think, like Dr. Anna Yudin or Tina Gilbertson, are they attempting to bring these parents closer to their children? Because ultimately, if you're a professional in the field, you should be mindful of people's goals as they are accessing your care or your advice.
So let's talk about if your adult child has mental illness. So for parents whose adult children have mental illness, they're not only faced with the pain of estrangement, the loss of contact with their adult child, but they're faced with the day-to-day ongoing worry about how their child is doing. Is my child homeless? Are they able to take care of themselves? Are they in an abusive relationship? Are they living in a car somewhere? Are they even alive? So the amount of pain and suffering for those whose adult children who are estranged and have mental illness or severe addictions is very acute. And so I just want to review briefly some of the ways that a child's mental illness can contribute to estrangement. The first is that it may interfere with their ability to regulate their own thoughts or feelings or affect.
Is there potential for an estranged adult child to have a mental illness? Absolutely 100%. Is there potential for that estranged adult child to be living in their car or not having a fixed address or being in a relationship that is not conducive to their mental health? There is the possibility for all of these things to be true, yes. However, you catastrophizing all of these things and putting them together into one big sentence in order to catch everybody, I do believe that a lot of estranged parents would be watching this and being like, yeah, of course, it's such an easy label to throw upon your estranged adult child of of course they're mentally ill. They don't want to be with me. I'm great.
Rage and trauma colliding.
This is an echo chamber. I'm sorry, we're only 53 seconds in. Do not listen to this man if you want a good relationship with your children. I'm sorry, it's just not going to get you there. He wants to tell you what you want to hear, which comes down to the monetization of his YouTube channel and his book. Sorry, that's what I think. So let's finish.
And so they may feel in the presence of the parent so over triggered by small things that the parent does that they don't know.
So does that have to do with the parent doing something that is effectively hurting the well-being of the child, or does that have to be mental illness? I don't understand the disconnect. And I do believe that this person has dealt with estrangement from his children as well, which does not surprise me.
Any other way to feel calm or non-triggered than to not be with the parent. Another reason that mental illness may cause an estrangement is it may cause the adult child to make incorrect causal links between their own childhoods or the parent's behavior and their current life outcome.
It's really ironic that he's talking about incorrect causal links when he is in fact doing that in this whole video itself. He's kind of making this claim that all estranged adult children are dealing with a mental illness. Of course, he hasn't said that, but he hasn't encouraged his audience to engage with his content in a responsible way. Not only is he not qualified, nor is anybody qualified to make these diagnoses through the screen of YouTube. You can't be providing clinical advice on YouTube for people that are just self-selecting your content. That is so harmful. That pushes people farther away from their estranged adult children. Oh, this guy blows my mind. And there's only a minute left. Okay, let's...
So they may feel like, well, it's because of, the way you treated me that I have these issues, or their mental illness may actually cause them to completely rewrite history. Well, it's because you abused me, even if the parent didn't. Sometimes the memories are very fantastical and the like, as a way for the adult child to make sense of the way that their lives haven't turned out. It may cause them to feel very defective and flawed and need to blame the parent for the same reason. It may cause them to be unable to navigate or manage the normal slings and arrows that come from parent-adult-child conflict. So they may just become much more enraged or upset or depressed if there are seemingly small conflicts between parent and adult child. Finally, it may make them much more vulnerable to manipulation from either the person that they're married to or your ex or some other motivated player. So I just can't express enough empathy for those parents who are faced not only with the pain of estrangement, but also the ongoing worry. And in my book, I talk a lot more about kind of what ways to work with an estranged family member who's also mentally ill.
Yikes. So again, we're not here to slander Dr. Coleman. If he is an actual doctor, I'm not sure. We are here to hold him accountable because I do think that he's creating an echo chamber for parents just to be able to easily write off their estranged adult children by saying, oh, they have mental health issues, so whatever, it's their problem. Especially in this video and what is to come, he is not encouraging these parents to be introspective, to look at the ways that their behavior might have contributed to the situation. And ultimately, it is a relationship that requires a back and forth. So even if the child is mentally ill, even if the child has any extenuating circumstance that would imply that they have somewhat responsibility for the reason that they are estranged from their parents, that doesn't mean that both parties still need to look inward. And I think that's the nuance that's missing from Dr. Coleman. He never talks about, from what I have seen so far, he never talks about you actually taking responsibility as that estranged parent. So he's an echo chamber. I believe the fired mom would love this man. And that's concerning because ultimately that pushes people farther away from creating a good relationship with their children. So next up, we're going to look at a video that was published by the YouTube account called TVO Today. Now, the title of the video is called What's Fueling Family Estrangement? Now, it's a panelist of 3 individuals, of which Dr. Coleman is one. So let's get into what they have to say.
All families fight, bicker, fall out, and reconcile. But some don't do that last part. For some, the disagreements or disapprovals lead to irreconcilable differences. Parents and children or siblings who simply never speak again. And there are signs that it's becoming more common than ever. With us now for a closer look at what's often called estrangement, we welcome, in the Bay Area city of Orinda in Northern California, Joshua Coleman, Senior Fellow with the Council on Contemporary Families and author of The Rules of Estrangement, Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. And here in our studio, life coach Becca Bland, who is Chief Executive and founder of Standalone UK, the only charity of its kind in the world supporting people estranged from family. And clinical counseling and health psychologist Saunia Ahmed, who is director of the Toronto Psychology Clinic. And we're happy to welcome you, 2 guests here in our studio here in Toronto, and Joshua, you on the west coast of California, to our program tonight. Joshua, we're going to get to the whys of this soon, but let's start with this. When did you first notice that family estrangements were becoming a bigger thing?
Well, I saw a huge uptick in my practice probably in the mid 2000s. And, I came to this topic because I was married and divorced in my 20s and have an adult daughter who I'm now very close to. But there was a period of time in her early 20s where she cut off contact with me for a couple of years, which is incredibly painful. There was nothing written at the time to help parents for it. And I eventually did work my way back to her. But going through that gave me a very profound sense of the kind of despair and heartbreak and sorrow and guilt and regret that estranged parents feel. So I've seen a huge uptick, really, I guess, in the past 15 years or so.
Okay. Becca, what does Standalone do?
So we are a charity that supports people who are estranged from their families or a key family member. So we support people from all kinds of estrangements. So people might be estranged from a parent, a child, a sibling, or the whole wider family. So we provide support groups, which we've just had a great clinical study that's proven how effective they are at reducing stigma and improving people's emotional well-being.
Do you come to this issue for the same reason Joshua did?
And personal experience of estrangement in my whole family through many generations has led me to an interest in this topic. And I think it's something I truly feel we need to speak more about in society to understand more and to know that not all families operate within this kind of very nuclear, close model that perhaps the media portray us to.
Saunia, in your practice, typically speaking, who wants to be estranged from whom?
Typically, it's often adult children who are estranged from their parents. In terms of want to, it may not be something they necessarily wanted to do, but they had to do in order to take care of their personal well-being. It got to a place where the relationship was so toxic that even though people believe, family sticks together, blood is thicker than water, it's just not possible to remain close to family if it's going to affect their own personal well-being.
It's kind of the same conversation as like cancel culture, right? A lot of people are like, oh, cancel culture is so bad. I'm like, I've never been afraid of being canceled because I'm not discriminatory. I'm not out here saying anything that people find offensive. I'm not being rude to people. I'm not doing anything that would imply me being canceled. So that's not something that I'm worried about. If I was a person who was saying racist things, homophobic things, if I was participating in anything that would potentially get me canceled, then I would have bad feelings about cancel culture. In the same way that like, if you are doing things that makes your child estrange themselves from you, of course you're going to hold this negative mindset for something like estrangement because it's something that you perpetuated. It's never just the child. Yeah, people are looking at intergenerational trauma. Get me Jamie Lynn Spears. Jamie Lynn Spears?
Well, that's simply not true.
The generations that are coming up now are not as interested in perpetuating this idea of
generational
trauma. I'm not willing to put my children through the same thing that I went through. And if that means estranging myself from a generation up, from people to the side in the family trees, from any direction, I am not willing to put my child through the same amount of family trauma. And I think that is a beautiful thing because ultimately you need to protect their children. If you are still perpetuating that same behavior, how are you not able to recognize that your child is attempting to put a stop to the same generational pattern of trauma that just continues and continues and continues? If anything, you should be proud of them for attempting to give their children the life that you weren't able to give them. Ooh, that was good.
Let's get into the whys then. Why does this seem to be happening more lately than previously?
Well, because the moral framework of what constitutes family has radically gone through a change in the past half century in particular, where the idea of honor thy mother and thy father, respect thy elders.
As soon as you get religion into here, I completely discount everything that you're going to say. Religion is fine, but the monetization of religion and the use of religion in order to uphold a set of standards upon people who do not hold the same religious affiliations is manipulative. It's not appropriate. It's unprofessional. It really takes your credibility down a few notches, in my opinion. The next step of respecting your elders, no, I don't believe in that. I think you should respect everybody until they have proven that they do not deserve your respect. It doesn't matter if you're old. If you don't respect me, I'm not going to show you that same respect. I'm out. It doesn't matter how old you are. And if I'm old and being disrespectful, I don't expect people to respect me just because I'm old. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. I'm sorry. And it's not the same thing as like, okay, if there's an older person on the train and I'm sitting and there's no seats, like I'll give my seat up for that elderly person on the train. But that's not respecting your elders. It's not the same thing. There's kind of those two contrasting ideas, right, of respecting your elders. I'm not going to respect you if you're being racist. Sorry, I'm just not. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, what color you are, who you love. If you're being a crappy person, you are not going to get my respect. And I think the whole world should be like that. Nobody inherently gets all the respect all the time without earning or maintaining some level of humanness in order to maintain that respect. So let's see what else he has to say.
Has been replaced with a much more personal self-esteem, mental health, happiness, self-growth, identity-focused notion of relationships. It has to do with...
He's just throwing all these buzzwords here. Like, yeah, what? These kids want to be mentally healthy? Ugh, gross. These kids want to have good self-esteem? Ugh, gross. Like, I am starting to fill in the blanks of why he might have been estranged from a child at some point in his life.
We've gone from role to self, a preoccupation with doing the right thing in terms of our role as a family member, to what's really good for our identity. So we have that on the one hand. We have the role of divorce, which in my research and other people's research has shown weakens family relationships. We have the role of social media, which serves as the kind of extended kin for both good and bad reasons. We have increasing tribalism, particularly in the United States, rising rates of individualism. So all of these factors contribute to a much more individualized view of family that is relatively new historically.
Okay, I got to follow up on that last part there because we cover a lot of politics on this show. It's not my imagination then that I seem to run into more people these days who say, you know, my parents love Trump and I just can't deal with that and I'm going to have to cut them off. That's a thing now.
This is an interesting part of it. Like, should you be cutting off a family member if they support Trump? I probably would. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know what that says about me.
It's a thing. Yeah, in the United States, according to one large survey, something like a third of family members are estranged because of political differences, which is really tragic. You know, the old days of agreeing to disagree.
Can you agree to disagree, though? I don't think you necessarily can. Can you separate the art from the artist? I don't think you can.
I certainly think that there are plenty of cases where it is the healthiest thing to do to cut off a family member who, say, consistently against your sexuality or gender identity or won't take responsibility for the ways that they were abusive or hurtful. But I also feel like we become very fragile in what binds us together as family members, in which I think are very problematic.
Let me follow up on that with you, Becca, because, and I'm trying not to make this sound like a stereotype in asking this question, but it is said Gen Y and Gen Z tend to be snowflakier than previous generations. And I wonder how much of estrangement happens because their skin just is not thick enough.
I think that, I want to fundamentally disagree with that, as I'm sure you'd expect me to do. I think that my generation, Gen X, Gen Y, have got more time, they've got more inclination to do more personal work in therapy, to explore themselves, and also to explore the intergenerational trauma.
This is what trauma looks like.
That their families may have brought to them. And so that means that they are more inclined to put stronger boundaries in place around difficult behaviours. So I wouldn't say it's flaky or having a thinner skin. I think it's actually just, my generation wants more healthy relationships, and they want their children to have more healthy relationships. So I think my generation see themselves as kind of like the cycle breakers, the people that want to, in some way, kind of make better behaviour more prevalent in families.
There was a term there, intergenerational trauma.
Generational trauma.
You want to just give us a handy definition of what that means?
Intergenerational trauma, I see it as a disease that spreads through family relationships. And often some people choose to deal with that disease by changing the relationship dynamic, maybe distancing themselves or breaking their relationship with their family. But fundamentally, it's traumatic reactions that are perpetuated through the family dynamics, because each person internalizes trauma a different way, the way they deal with their thoughts and their feelings, and then that affects their parenting. And how they parent then impacts the person, their children, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I love these two women so much. I completely agree with everything that they're saying. I think they're on the right side of the conversation in order to either preserve your mental health and well-being as a child who is estranged from your parents, or for parents who are attempting to bring themselves closer to those children. At some point, you need to take responsibility for your own actions. And if you are somebody who supports Trump, if you are QAnon or anti-vax or any of those things, your children might cut you off. And unless you are willing to, it just makes so much sense. It seems very cut and dry to me. And like Becca said, a lot of these people are just seeking more healthy relationships. So if you're not able to have a healthy relationship with somebody, you shouldn't be a part of their lives.
Becca, can you tell us when adult children want to, I don't even know what the right term is here, want to impose an estrangement on their senior parents, what kind of challenges and what are they facing in attempting to do that?
I think sometimes the language that we use here is sometimes a bit flippant about sometimes, that we need to, do something that's a really quick decision. Whereas for many people, this is like laboured over for a long period of time. They've tried to make the relationship better. They've said what's the issue, and then there's been no progress. And so I think that what they're faced with is, in this situation, just a huge, difficult decision, and something that they will, ultimately there isn't a great outcome in either way, because it can be incredibly difficult to be estranged from a family member. It presents its own set of challenges, but it can also be incredibly difficult to stay in a very dysfunctional and abusive dynamic in a family relationship as well.
So follow up on that. What's the upside of estrangement?
Well, I think that first of all, for the future generations of a family, there's kind of getting rid of really difficult behaviour. If somebody in your family isn't very willing to work on something or to change or to accept your point of view, be seeing you in how you want to be seen, in the changes you're trying to make in the dynamic, I think it's really, really important that, we can have a break. Like, why is it so hard to accept in society that we can have a break from relationships when in almost every other relationship in our society, it's okay to take time. It's okay to step back.
I love Becca so much. Unrelated. I just love her so much.
Because it sounds, Saunia, completely beyond the pale to want a break from people who gave you life. Is that fair to say?
Very absolutely. It's actually quite painful when one family member initiates an estrangement, the other family member didn't want that. It's very, very difficult. It's heartbreaking. It's like, especially if it's a parents, they gave everything, they sacrificed a lot. And again, as I work with New Canadians who left one country for another in order to give their children the best life possible, and then the child decides to take a break, it feels like a major betrayal.
I'd like to
It does feel like actually, yeah, God, yeah. I want to let Becca talk because she's just my favorite of all.
I'd like to come in there and just say that actually I feel it could also be an opportunity. And so do we have to see it as a betrayal, or could we see it as an opportunity for some people to work on themselves and create better relationship values and behaviors that perhaps they never had the time when they were bringing up a small family to develop?
Exactly. And like it alludes to a bigger conversation here of like, do you owe your parents something for giving you life? I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer on that, but I want you to think about that. Like, do you owe your parents something? I don't have children, so I can't speak it from that direction. If I had children, I would not want them to perpetually feel indebted to me because I gave them life. If I choose to have children, that is my choice, and that is something that I'm subjecting myself to. So that child doesn't owe me anything because I decided to have children. I think where it gets a little bit messy here is that society definitely perpetuates this idea of not being successful until you have children, and especially from the women's side of like, you're not a real woman unless you have children. So there is this idea that society has pushed a lot of these people to have children in order to feel successful. But then if you're putting all of your identity as a person into that of having children, and then your children estranged from you, then that can feel very personal, and you can feel like they owe you because they were manipulated into having children. So again, that experience is valid if you were manipulated into having children, which I believe a lot of people were. That does not mean your children owe you something, and I don't think that sets you up for a strong family relationship if that's how you view your children.
So is it really right to say that it's a betrayal always, or is it somebody saying, I'm calling time because this isn't working? And for all of us, we need to have a break here to be able to kind of create something more healthy and more real.
Well, let me pick up on that with Joshua. Do you believe, Joshua, that adult children owe their parents something, even if they want to be estranged from them?
Well, can I step back for a second and address some of the earlier topics?
He never answers that question, by the way. He just goes back.
And come back to that. First of all, let's talk about the notion of trauma. There is an important study by Nick Haslam, who's a psychologist in Australia. And one of the things Haslam found was that he calls it concept creep, which is the idea that in the past 3 decades, there's been an enormous expansion of what we believe constitutes traumatic, harmful, abusive, and hurtful behavior. So a lot of what younger generations are calling any of those things to justify their estrangements are things that in the parents' generation would not have been considered any of those things. So there's often this very general...
He's calling them snowflakes again. That's the subtext here of like, your parents went through worse, so why are you complaining? Again, it perpetuates this idea of intergenerational trauma. I can't wait for these women to blow him out of the water. Becca is not very good at hiding her facial expressions and disdain for this man as he's talking, which is hilarious.
Generational disconnect between what constitutes harmful, traumatic, or abusive behavior. And part of what my role is with doing family therapy is helping bridge that kind of cultural, generational gap. So I think it's a really important thing. Also, people don't estrange themselves just because of trauma and child abuse. They estrange themselves because they get married and their spouse doesn't like them.
I can't. That is so. What are you saying? He just said people. He just said that people don't estrange themselves because of child abuse. They estrange themselves because they get into relationships where their partner doesn't like their parent. This man supposedly has a doctorate in psychology and offers clinical assistance to families experiencing this. Oh God, somebody look into this man. It's not going to be me. I can't take any more of him, but this is questionable. This is questionable.
It's strange because their parents get divorced and one parent poisons a child against the other parent, or the child independently just blames one parent for breaking up the happy home. They get estranged not only because of the parent's mental illness or abusive behavior, because of the adult child's addictions or mental
Exactly. The child is an addict. They struggle with mental health. It's all their fault. It's not them. He is placating these abusive systems to be able to still think that they're in the right. This isn't going to bring you closer to your child. I just imagine if he's in a situation, like if he's doing family therapy with people, I imagine like an adult child coming in, participating in a session with him and running so far in the other direction for the hills and never coming back. If you're an estranged parent and if you're still watching this video, good for you. If you're still here, I'm very proud of you. If you listen to people like this, he is going to push you farther away from your children. You need to know that this man is going to push you farther away from your children. Like, listen to the women. In this context, listen to these women, not women as a whole. I mean, you do what you want to, but in this context, the women in this situation are going to bring you closer to your child if that's what you're interested in doing.
They also can get estranged because a family member, parent, or adult goes into therapy, and that therapist misdiagnoses either the adult child or the parent.
It's wild that he is basically saying here that it's the therapist's fault, it's the boyfriend or girlfriend's fault, it's the other parent's fault, it's everybody's fault except for the behavior of the parent who has been estranged.
Eat glass.
If I wasn't wearing a full face of makeup, I would slap my cheeks right now in a Home Alone way. You know that? Oh, actually, I could. You know? Very that. It's giving very that. I've been filming here for a long time.
Launches of estrangement. So I think it's critically important that we widen this discussion beyond traumatizing parents and snowflake children. A. And B, I think both generations owe something to the other. I think that parents owe to their adult children a willingness to take responsibility, to show empathy, to show compassion, to find the kernel, if not the...
You didn't show any of that just now, so how are you passing that off to clients through your book? I'm not buying it.
Bushel of truth in the children's complaints. I think adult children should try to see their parents as flawed, but trying the best they could, even when that best was not very good, to give them the opportunity to do therapy, to make amends, and to heal the bridge. So both generations owe the other more time, more care, more consideration.
Becca, is part of your organization's mission to bring people back from estrangement, or are you more focused on how to effect estrangement in a healthy way for everybody? What's the focus?
So I think it's really important that, we recognise that there's been a huge push towards reconciliation with a lot of services, and that ultimately what my charity does is take a very non-judgmental stance. And what we say is that you know what's best for your family relationship. We don't know. So I could sit here and say I know what's best for every family relationship in Canada, but that would be a lie. I don't. Only you live within your family relationship. So what our organisation does is that it helps people to kind of look at the best way forward. For some people, they may desperately want reconciliation with a family member, and they may really want the behaviour to change. And so we help them to understand how they can best go about that. And for others, they may just have done too much work on this with their family, and nothing has changed for years. So we help them to try and find peace and a different way forward in their life, on their own, with new family, like, for example, a kinship family, friends, new partners, and ultimately to try and find a life that's nourishing for themselves beyond this issue. And so I think the organisation takes critically a non-judgmental stance on this.
Understood. We have heard of the expression ghosting, Saunia, when it comes to dating, right? People just disappear, right? They don't return your calls, they don't return your texts and all that. Do you see any of that happening as it relates to family estrangement, that somebody just literally cuts somebody off with no apparent warning and they're just ghosted?
I do see that, and it's not as common as it is on online dating in particular. It's not that easy to just ghost your family. They pick up on it very easily. But certainly I'm finding more and more, I'm seeing people have difficulty in communicating around relationships and difficult relationships and how they may want to distance themselves. So they just deal with it by ghosting, by just not talking. A lot of times when people are estranged and they realize they're estranged, we haven't spoken. There's no actual talk about, hey, we're going to be estranged. It just happens. And sometimes it can happen to somebody who just least expects it. And I just also want to pick up on what we're talking about here too with regards to reconciling as well. If people want to do that, sometimes what I find when I work with people who are dealing with being at some stage of the estrangement process is that they are really wishing for their, say, for instance, an adult child, their parents to change, to apologize, to acknowledge something. And the work in therapy, whether or not they choose to reconcile or not with their family, is for them to process those feelings and to let go of that wish for their family to change and to grieve what they couldn't have, and to see, as was talked about, is that their families are humans. There's much more complex. Not everyone's family is as ideal as they want it to be. So people can do that work of healing, the personal healing that they need to do. Sometimes they absolutely need to be disconnected from the family, but sometimes they may not need to. They just need to know that the work is their own.
So you can wait a long time for an apology, or you can accept the fact that it ain't going to happen and do the best you can.
Absolutely, and sometimes hope in the wrong places can also be maladaptive.
Joshua, how about this notion, Joshua, of ghosting? Do you see much of that, and do you think, is there ever a legitimate reason to simply ghost your parents who may be in their, 70s or 80s?
No, there's not. There's not a legitimate reason to just suddenly stop talking to somebody. I mean, I think, as Becca was saying earlier, in many cases, it's there has been an attempt to talk to the parent, to complain, et cetera, but not always. Sometimes people ghost because they have mental illness or because they're too embarrassed that their spouse is saying, choose me or them, you can't have both. There's a lot of reasons for it. But otherwise, everybody deserves an explanation, particularly in a family relationship where the consequence is enormous heartbreak. I'm working not only with the parents, but also the adult children. And this is a source of enormous pain on both sides. And one of the other things that I want to go back to, we're talking a lot about this from a kind of an individualistic perspective of like, well, it may be better for the adult child to take a break. Well, it may well be, but estrangements are rarely dyadic or even triadic. When an adult child cuts off contact with a parent, it often divides families that fractures out in many ways.
It's so interesting that he's like, yeah, it may be better for you, snowflake, but you need to harm yourself in order to, like, how is this man a professional in this field? I don't get it. There's logical fallacies. It's wild.
The adult child is the gatekeeper to the grandchildren. So if there's an estrangement between the parent then that may, and the adult child, that may later mean that there's no contact with the grandparents and the grandchildren, even loving, dedicated grandparents. So
again, it doesn't, like, ultimately, yes, is that sad for the grandparents? Yes. Would it be better for children to have a relationship with as many supporting adults in their life as possible? Yes. Nobody's going no contact with their parents on a whim, right? There would be reasons involved beyond this idea of like, oh, they're crazy in mental health and their spouse doesn't. No. Putting a stop to this
family trauma
to pass on to your children is the responsibility of the parent. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for people who are able to do that. I really, really do, because it's hard, but it's important.
Becca, perhaps give us some advice on this. If you're an adult child and your children, who are genuinely children, come to you and the child says, how come we don't see grandma or grandpa anymore? How do you handle that moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that in terms of handling that moment, I would always say for young children is to be very clear and very truthful with them about what's happening. I think that to cover it up and to deceive children will only come out in the end in a more difficult way. Lies that come out in adulthood, for example, can cause family estrangements themselves later down the line. So if we systemically start lying to children about things that are happening within our families, then it's not going to lead to stronger relationships in the end. And just to come back on Josh's point about grandchildren, then I think I want to come back to the point I've been saying about so many adult children feel they're kind of having a break from relationships or estranging from relationships because they want their grandchildren to be brought up around more healthy behaviours. And I think that if you don't see any kind of movement in the relationship or movement in the behaviour from, you know, the old elderly parents, let's say, it's going to be very hard for someone to say, oh, I want that around my grandchildren. I want that around my children. Like, you know, I think that's an incredibly hard thing to want to put your children in the way of harm. Like, that's what a lot of people who want to withhold that contact, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is protect their children.
Joshua?
That suggests that that one can't be a loving, dedicated grandparent and still have conflict with one's adult children. Plenty of people don't have great relationships with their adult children, but they're fantastic grandparents, and their grandchildren adore them. And I frequently work with parents who even by the adult child's own admission, say that they were good, loving grandparents. So this idea...
Yeah, but children don't have the discernment skills to be able to make a qualified judgment like that. Kids can like people who are bad for them. Adults can like people who are bad for them. That doesn't mean anything. I'm sorry. It brings up this conversation again of how much can you compartmentalize something, right?
That if it's not good for the adult child, that it's toxic to the children, I think just isn't borne out by the evidence.
Can you be this honest and say, your grandfather is a QAnon supporting nut job and I can't have him in our lives anymore? I mean, is that too honest for a child?
It's not about honesty. It's about sharing information in a developmentally appropriate way, in a way that they would understand. And it would be good for them. Children are sponges. They absorb it. They understand something's going on. So it's definitely very important to tell them something, such as there's disagreements between myself and your grandparents, and for that reason we can't communicate and spend time together. And just building on what Becca has said is that we've got to normalize the idea that sometimes some relationships, they require some distancing, so that the people can grow in a healthy way. And a lot of times parents realize, I don't want to allow what my parents put in me to be put upon my children. And so that distance is important, and definitely you can communicate something that they would understand.
But Grandpa's a QAnon supporting nut job is probably not the best way to put it.
Yes, kind of modeling for them, exactly. I mean, modeling for them hostility, the same kind of hostility that your grandparents are expressing. So you want to actually express it in a way that they can understand and learn from and understand. In society, there's a lot of people who disagree, and sometimes we have that in our family.
Gotcha.
I just want to say as well, I wasn't advocating any kind of hostile talk around
No,
I was saying that not lying to them, basically saying we don't have a relationship at the moment, is probably more appropriate than trying to cover it up and say something, that's a complete story.
They're too busy to see us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that, so I think, I wouldn't say you should, start to influence the relationship of the grandchild with the grandparent. So I think that kind of alienation is quite dangerous. But I do think that kind of, being honest about why we're not seeing grandparents is really important too.
I have seen, I got to tell you, Joshua, I have seen situations where parents, adult children, have told their parents, grandparents, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not seeing your grandchildren. I mean, that's the reality. So how much of COVID has influenced estrangement that we're seeing these days?
I am seeing that. And I see COVID as part of sort of the larger tribal political fracturing that's happening. But I definitely think that COVID has heated up people's anxieties. It's heated up kind of hostility around family relationships. And it's also heated up people's needs to establish boundaries with family members, which I think, as my co-panelists have said, it can be really useful and important, but boundaries also can keep people out as well. And so we just have to be careful about it. But absolutely.
And that is the point of a boundary, Dr. Coleman.
Absolutely, COVID has been an issue.
Saunia, you seen that in your practice? COVID has resulted in breaks among families because maybe someone doesn't want to get vaccinated, or maybe somebody is an anti-vaxxer, or all that kind of stuff.
COVID has certainly, as Josh indicated, amplified a lot of cracks in the family relationships and polarized people around political issues regarding vaccination, masking, and many political issues. And definitely, there's been a lot of conflict around vaccination because a lot of families, certain people got vaccinated, certain people didn't, and that causes a lot of arguments. And that means some people are not getting together for certain cultural celebrations.
Do you see this too?
I do think, I mean, it's like any big kind of thing that happens. It can be very divisive depending on where you sit, on what family lines you sit as well. And so, I do think that COVID has got a big impact on all relationships, and families included.
Joshua, let's talk discipline, because I guess there's an argument to be made that the older generation sometimes thinks the younger generation, their adult children, are too indulgent with their children/grandchildren. And therefore, the grandparents intervene, and the parents don't like it, and the grandchildren are amused by the whole damn thing. To what degree do you think that the bar becoming too low as to what's considered toxic parenting is at play here?
Well, I think the bar is way too low in terms of what's considered toxic parenting. And I think that parents have become very vigilant about how their children are treated, and very worried about them. And I think
is that a bad thing?
I think that's partly the fault of people in my field. I think we've sort of done too much education about the potential harm to children, so that the idea that
this man, as if we didn't know it already, this man is part of the problem. He is so much part of the problem.
Parents' behavior is going to be hurtful, has become a source of estrangements and conflict. There was a recent survey that said that something like 50% of grandparents have ongoing conflict with their adult children about grandparenting issues. So it's a very hot topic in families these days.
Okay, so he has a doctorate, he's a psychologist, he wrote a book. I challenge this man to produce one estranged adult child who is now fostering a positive relationship with their used-to-be estranged parent. I would argue that this man is going to push estranged adult children so much farther away from their parents. Anyway.
I can understand that grandparents sometimes meddle in parenting because they don't like the way that their adult children are parenting the grandchildren, those adult children's children. And most grandparents won't run into trouble if they just keep their nose out of telling their children how to discipline their grandchildren, right? But sometimes they can't resist.
Right, that's true.
And does that become a source of estrangement over the years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that some adult children feel like, look, if you can't respect my boundaries about how I want to raise my children, then you can't see me or my children. So I absolutely think that's an issue.
Okay.
I'd like to come in there and
Please.
say that I've worked with a lot of people in my personal practice who have that issue exactly, of that their grandparents have just really intervened or kind of made big steps within what they think how their adult child should be parenting.
And they shouldn't do that. Is your advice?
I would absolutely say that you've got to give somebody the freedom to parent their child as they want to parent their child.
And make mistakes.
And make mistakes,
the way
of course, the way
to.
they did. Yeah, like there's no, I don't think there's any formula, and I don't think there's any big right and wrong. And people are bringing up children now in a generation and a time that's very different to how they were brought up. They were themselves brought up by their grandparents. So I think it's really appropriate to have more time, space and freedom for adult children to bring their kids up as they wish to.
What's, Saunia, talk to us about in our remaining moments here, the road back to reconciliation. Do we assume that the best outcome all the time is that all parties figure out a way to get back together again?
Well, family estrangement is a complex process, and people in families, even the most loving families, have difficulty getting along. And in terms of whether they reconcile or not, that is something that is a decision that the person needs to make for themselves. They need to be much more, what I do is I help them understand what's leading to the problems in the relationship, what is contributing to how they feel and how they think, and to help them see if they'd wanted to, what that will entail for them in the end, how it'll help them, because sometimes it'd be very detrimental. It can really stop them from growing, as was talked about here with Josh and Becca, is that sometimes being together in a relationship can just cause more grief, more personal harm, and it may not be the best outcome. But the risk is that in trying to, what we want to stay away from is the risk is that in trying to reconcile, that we don't continue to perpetuate the problem for the individual. So just the answer to that question is it really depends.
It does, doesn't it? You can, so you can't, Becca, in your work say, the goal here is to get everybody singing Kumbaya in a circle after it's all said and done. That may not necessarily be the best option.
Well, no, not particularly for very in-depth issues like, childhood sexual abuse. Like, it can be incredibly difficult to have a relationship with somebody that's experienced that kind of dynamic within their families. And so many family estrangements stem from issues like that. So, it's beautiful if you can do what Brené Brown says, which is rupture and repair. And if you can really, if everyone can take part in the repair in a very genuine way and has the skills, the communication skills, the patience, the time, to really have empathy with each other, of course, that's a really amazing outcome and one that we would all want. But I think that unfortunately that isn't always what human reality is in families, that some people don't have any time, space or inclination to actually see, hear or understand the other person. And they just think they should just put up with it, or that's just, the part of families. And I think, that means that it's incredibly difficult to sing Kumbaya together because you're not being seen as a human or ultimately respected. And we all want respect from everyone in our lives, right?
And what Becca just said is so much the tea. If you're not feeling seen and respected, you are not going to be able to have a relationship with that person, period, end of story. All right, team, so that's going to be the end of that video right here. I thought it was just really interesting to see some contrasting viewpoints here interacting with each other in real life. Of course, my view isn't the ultimate view. It's not necessarily the correct view. It's exactly that, my view. And you need to be critical of all the content that you are consuming across the internet, even when it comes from licensed professionals, because as we've seen here, you don't always get the advice that's most conducive to your goals from people who are licensed professionals. Girly Pops, if you're still here, this is probably pretty meaningful to you, and I just want to extend so much empathy from me to you, whether you are a parent in this relationship, whether you are the child in this relationship. I have my own experience with estranged adult children, so I'm not speaking from nothing necessarily here, but if you've gotten this far, I do want you to know that there are ways that you can help yourself. There are things that you can do, but ultimately you need to keep in mind your ultimate goal of the situation and how your behavior is affecting the pursuit of your goal. And whatever your goal is completely valid, and you need to find a way to live a life that is gratifying for yourself. The last thing we're going to look at here is from a YouTube page called Estranged Parents, and this is going to be indulgent. This right here is where we get a little bit self-indulgent, because we're going to watch this 16-minute video, and it is called My Daughter Stopped Talking to Me, So I Let Her Go. Now, with all the information, we've heard from all the experts, we've heard the anecdotal evidence, we've heard the studies, we've done all the things, we have all the knowledge. Not all the knowledge, but we have knowledge. We've heard Jamie Lee Curtis say intergenerational trauma more times than we can count.
Trauma. Yeah. Trauma. 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 Trauma.
And we're going to watch this video and see how what we've learned might influence how we view this individual and them telling their story. So let's get into it.
I really thought I could get through this without crying. 27% of American adults have cut contact with a family member, lasting an average 4.5 years. I never dreamed I'd be part of that statistic. Have you seen this?
Dear parents, I need to speak my truth. All my life, I've been gasping for what I need to say. I need you to know how you're feeling my mental health. It's bad. Have my life ruined because of you.
90% of the letter was about politics and how we couldn't be in her life if we supported that guy. This kind of angry outburst from her was so out of character, we were shocked. We just didn't know what to do. I mean, I thought I was a good mom. Not perfect, but pretty good. Honestly, I was in denial at this point because I thought this was more a thing between her and my husband, Ted, because I'm not that political at all. So I thought we could still have a relationship. So one day I responded positively to one of her Facebook posts, like normal, thinking that the letter was just some one-off thing that would blow over. But she unfriended me and followed up with a text that said something like, "You don't get to stay in my life. I'm keeping this number for family emergencies only. Don't contact me." Ted's sister got involved to see if she could help, but Haley immediately unfriended her, which was surprising because the two of them were politically aligned. Friends offered to step in and say something on our behalf, but after what happened to Ted's sister, we just said no. A couple weeks later, she did not wish me happy birthday for the very first time. This wound was so fresh, I couldn't even say her name when I talked about it.
I've even had some people really close to me decide to move on from me. And that's the hardest of all.
In November,
If other people are moving on from you, you have to understand that you're the common denominator between all of these things. The audio engineering of this video is garbage. The sad music, like you are editing yourself into being the victim here. And you can't say that you are existing in neutrality when you're still married to somebody who supports that man. I understand. There's a lot of confidence that somebody needs to have in order to end a marriage with somebody like that. I understand that. I can't identify with it, but I understand it. And there is a lot of societal and cultural things that perpetuates this idea that women cannot exist on their own. I am not tone deaf to those challenges that especially this generation of older women face. I understand. But that does not mean that your daughter needs to still have you in your life if you are perpetuating these harmful ideas. And this idea that, oh, it came out of nowhere, like we saw that. That was Dr. Anna Yudin, right? Who said that these things don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen out of nowhere. They are calculated. And if you don't see them coming, it really fits the narrative that you wouldn't see this coming because you are not attuned to your child in these moments. So, all right.
I texted her that we were going to Montana to see her sister for Thanksgiving and that she was warmly invited, but if we didn't hear back, we'd assume she wasn't interested. Silence. In December, I texted Merry Christmas and told her that we loved her. Silence.
She asked for no contact.
So that winter, I emailed her a few times, mostly personal development stuff that I thought she'd be interested in. More silence. Around this time, I started watching videos on estrangement to see if I could figure out what was going on. I did it intermittently because...
Oh, look who it was. Look, it's just Dr. Okay, it's all... Yeah, it's all... Another piece of the puzzle comes flying into place, doesn't it?
Still in denial.
Oh, hey, we looked at her.
Come back in time. And it seemed appropriate to reach out occasionally to let her know I loved her because that's what moms are supposed to do, right?
I mean, I tried to maintain contact. She shut that down.
The longer this went on, the more real it began to feel, and there was just this cauldron of emotions, horrible emotions, shock and shame, anger, denial, sadness, depression, betrayal. It was so hard to process. I joined some parental estrangement groups on Facebook to see how other parents were coping, and while it was nice to know that I wasn't alone, I could not spend too much time there because it was all the same misery that I felt. So horribly sad and depressing. There were just broken hearts everywhere. I could not face all that pain.
Because it's an echo chamber.
Sadly, at one point, I had to text her to let her know Grandpa died, Ted's dad. She'd had a good relationship with him. I was very matter-of-fact about it. He died. There's a memorial. Here's the Zoom link. This was still during COVID. She did attend, to her credit. We were glad to see her there, although we didn't see her there. She didn't have her camera on and she didn't say anything. She was there.
Why would she say anything? It's not about her. She's there for the... I can't.
I sent her a text wishing her happy birthday and telling her I loved her.
You said cutie? No, straight to jail. Don't say cutie. Like, how do you see this as helping? How do you see this as helping? Get into therapy. Get into therapy. Get off Facebook and get into therapy.
I was so sad on her birthday. This is a very special day for me too. It's the day I first became a mother.
I guess that's my way of saying I still love you, I still think about you, but I don't want to intrude in your space.
I don't want to intrude in your space except for all these ways I'm intruding on your space like right now. Please don't go send this person hate. And I'm not like roasting them specific, but like at some point you have to view your behavior as not getting what you want. So why are you doing the same thing and expecting different results? At some point you have to modify what you're doing if it's not getting you what you want. I can have empathy for this person, but ultimately you got to change up your strategy. If your strategy is not working, you got to change it. Stop trying to make it work if it's clearly not going to. Like, she asked you not to contact her. So why are you continuing to contact her?
This is probably going to sound stupid, but I buy myself a present for Haley's birthday every year. It's like a consolation prize.
It's not stupid. It makes sense. What does sound stupid to me, if I was going to assign a label like stupid to that, is sharing it online. What is the point of you sharing this? And of course, there's no reason for us to know. But I don't think the reason that she's sharing her story is healthy. I don't think it's healthy. I think it would be self-indulgent, and in order to help reinforce that what she did wasn't wrong. And of course, I don't know the context for all of this. Might I be wrong about the specific situation? Absolutely. Do I think I am? No. But that's okay.
Mother's Day 2021 also passed in silence for the very first time. By now, I had moved from shock and shame into feeling this kind of low-level anger, definitely resentment, and yeah, betrayal. My husband may have texted her once or twice that summer, but I did not. On the 1-year anniversary of her angry letter, I emailed my sad letter response. I started off with a story about the time I saved her from choking to death on a candy wrapper when she was a baby.
Are you kidding me? Stop it. You haven't. You were on your back, arms and legs flailing in distress. I can't. What do you even say to this? As a new mom, I kept a vigilant eye on you, except for the time that you almost choked to death on a candy wrapper. How is that the intro? How is that your hi, how are you? I just don't...
Which was probably the worst way to start, but I didn't know.
What do you mean you didn't know? You just said you knew. How do you not know? You knew.
Then I went into the I don't know everything, but I did the best I could reasoning. Then I went on to calmly address some of the points in her letter. I apologized for not being the parent she needed, but I also expressed dismay at her level of intolerance, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I wanted to be honest. And
as you're sitting there like smirking, like I know that some people smile when they're nervous, so maybe that's what this is, but like you're saying you did all these things, but then I probably shouldn't have done that. But why does she not want to talk with me? I'm like, how do you not see this? How do you not see that this behavior that you're still engaging in is probably the main reason as why she's gotten no contact with you?
And basically just wished her the best of everything in life. My birthday passed in silence once again, which is sad because she was the one who always remembered everybody's birthdays in the family, even my dad's, who she hardly knew. Around this time, we discovered her TikTok, which I have to confess was strange and difficult to digest because she does a lot of exotic cosplay. And I couldn't help myself. I binge watched a bunch of them, then combed through all the comments looking for any mention of us. I was pretty annoyed at being relegated to the status of random internet viewer, but I was glad that I could see her.
Again, that's a violation of her privacy. She doesn't want any contact with you. You shouldn't be looking at her TikTok. And what does exotic cosplay mean? And also, why would you be mentioned in the comments? My parents aren't mentioned in any of my comments of my videos for anything. It just doesn't make sense as to why unless your content is about your parents, why would people be mentioning your parents in your videos? Ooh.
November, my husband and I caught the super nasty Delta version of COVID. It was truly awful for me, but way, way worse for Ted. We're talking hospitals, paramedics. It got so bad, I texted her. I told her that she should call Daddy-O because he had COVID and he wasn't doing well at all. He was really struggling and it was scary. And she did call, which was a miracle. But
Apparently, she was almost like an automaton, dead inside. I don't know, kind of like a robot. I mean, Ted really appreciated the call. Don't get me wrong. Really appreciated that call. It meant so much to him. But it was also like she wasn't all there. It was very strange.
Ted texted her after he recovered to thank her for calling, but she didn't respond. My dad died on Christmas Day, but I didn't bother to tell Haley because she didn't really know him. He was a sweet guy, but kind of an odd duck living in his own world. But he was my dad, and it was really hard to watch him die. And the one gift that you get out of that typically is that it makes you realize how short and precious life is. And I'm older. I'm in my 50s. I mean, mortality is right there. When you're a kid, you look at your parents like this big, all-knowing people, and then when you get to be an adult, you realize, oh my God, they're flawed. And there's a breakaway period where you break away and you're like, get away from me. And then usually there's a period where they come back, and hopefully they will at some point. But just in case they don't, they'll have some videos to watch about who was mom and what did she worry about and what did she think about. And I don't know, maybe nobody cares. So I was grieving for Dad that winter, but also for Haley, who didn't seem to care.
I'm sorry, I cry a lot. I'm a crier. I don't think I've ever whipped out my phone and started recording my pain in order to, like, I don't know, stick it to somebody else. Like, I don't understand why do you... She has all of these separate clips of her crying. I don't know if that's healthy.
I texted her happy birthday and told her that I loved her, which was my only attempt at contact that entire year. Silence. So of course I had to peek at TikTok. I read all her birthday comments, and she seemed to have a lot of fans sending her presents. We have been replaced by fans. I ordered Joshua Coleman's book, Rules of Estrangement, scanned a couple of chapters out of order, including the amends letter section, which I could not stomach because it required far too much contrition. Like, it's all the parents' fault. We had no contact. I threw myself into a new YouTube channel and took a month-long camping trip around the U.S. After my dad dying and losing Haley, I just needed to get out and start living my own dreams now before it's too late. I brought the Coleman book with me on this adventure, but I didn't read it. I was still low-level bitter and resentful over being ghosted. On my birthday, which passed again in silence, I went for a hike.
And 2 years later, she's still not talking to me. Can't make her love me. I can't make her want to talk to me. I can't make her call. I can't make her do anything. So I'm just trying to cope. I never in a million years imagined that I would have a daughter who would just cut me out of her life. We did the best we could. We poured a lot of love and resources and time and energy, and she rejected me. And it's hard not to hold a grudge.
Admitting that I was angry and holding a grudge was really hard because that's not who I am. I binged on her TikTok again and found some references to us, including a video dedicated to what she'd learned going no contact with her parents. I sat down with Ted and we watched together. You know, I think the thing that I guess irks me, that whole love with strings attached thing, I don't get that. I don't know where that comes from.
I don't want to be with people like that. They love you for who you are, not for who they want you to be.
She was tactful, but the comments supporting her decision to dump us were really hard to take. We also learned that she's been diagnosed with ADHD and high-functioning autism, which was news to us.
You know, maybe that explains some of her behavior. We never knew. If we had seen it, we would have taken her to doctors, but we didn't see it. She seemed like a normal kid to us.
Oh, don't say normal. Stop participating in the deficit model. Gross.
She doesn't even care how we feel. She doesn't care if we're struggling with this issue. She doesn't care if we're alive or dead. I mean, she doesn't really know. I don't hear any, I'm really sorry. There's nothing there. There's just, I had a mental problem. Sorry. She didn't care. She doesn't care still. I'm sorry. I'm just very upset.
I really thought we did our best.
You can do your best and that cannot be enough. You need to be able to take what you've done and take responsibility for it and modify it going forward. And if you can't do that, I think it's justified to be able to cut those people out. I do.
Throughout this whole ordeal, I've continued my daily meditation practice, and afterwards I usually spend a few minutes reading from some inspirational book. At one point, I was reading about living a compassionate life, and when I got to the chapter on forgiveness, wow.
Lately, I've been thinking about forgiveness. Forgiving her, but forgiveness for myself, too, and Ted. But mostly myself. Because you can't help but blame yourself when something like this happens with a child that you raised and poured all your love and energy and everything. You know, we just gave her the best of everything we could.
Letting go of our anger is a way of being compassionate towards ourselves. Anger keeps us stuck in the past, obsessing over what has already happened. Forgiveness does not ignore the harm or justify a person's misdeeds, but it releases the pain and anger connected to them. I debated texting happy birthday, but did not.
Today is my daughter's birthday. She is 29, and she hasn't spoken with us for 2.5 years now. And that has been very difficult to deal with. But I'm learning to accept it because that's all I can do. The last text I sent was happy birthday last year. So she is lost to us now at this point. And this was not something we ever envisioned for our lives. Oh God, I'm going to cry. I thought I was going to make it through this without crying. But I can't.
Like, okay, I'm going to say this one final time and then I'm not going to mention it again. I do have empathy for this person. I'm not a robot sitting here who doesn't care about the well-being of this individual in front of me who is obviously struggling with an issue. However, my empathy is guided by my discernment, and I think there's an incredible amount of nuance that this person is missing to be able to recognize their responsibility in the outcomes of their own life. So their experiences are valid, and I don't wish harm for this person at all. I truly wish this person and all of the people that we've watched so far in this video, I wish them all the best. So I don't want you to go and leave nasty comments on any of these people's profiles. That is not the role of my content. I want this to be educational, maybe comedic. I want this to be a jumping off point for you maybe to have this conversation with yourself, or maybe in the comments with me or with people in your life who this is important to. Like, we're not here roasting this specific person. We are going hard on the issues and easy on the people. We're roasting this context. We're roasting this culture. We're not roasting this woman sitting in front of us right here. We wish her the best. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Because I don't feel emotional watching her cry right now. I don't care, but that's why. Because I'm being critical right now of what's going on. I wish her the best, but I don't care about her.
It's like she's dead, but she's not, and I'm grateful that she's not. And I am grateful that she's on social media somewhere. If I feel the need to go see her, I can see her. So, happy birthday, Haley. I wish you all the best in what you're doing. I admire that you're following your dreams and you're doing what you believe is right. And I hope you are loved and surrounded by people who truly love you, not for some persona that you may be online, but for who you truly are as a person. And I know you're a kind soul with a really big heart, with so much love to give. And so I hope you find a place to express that love and find someones who appreciate that love and reflect it back to you. I wish you health and happiness to just live your best life. Do good in the world. Just know that I still love you, no matter what you say or don't say about me. You can't change that. I will fucking love you forever, like it or not. Because I'm a mom.
Moms are like that.
All right. Wow, we have got ourselves, well, they be solely cats. That brings us to the end of this video. This has been a really long one, so if you're still here, thank you so much for joining me. If you're interested in my other content, I have lots of other YouTube stuff. I have a podcast on Spotify and YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. If you have anything that you want me to make a video about or anything particularly heinous out in the world you want me to see, you can upload it to your Google Drive and share it with me. My email is david.bay.booking@gmail.com, so feel free to send that to me there. Honestly, I encourage you to take everything that I said with a grain of salt, because inherently I am biased with my own life experience. I am not offering this as clinical advice or really any kind of advice at this point. So I'm just sharing my perspective and conglomerating some experiences here from estranged parents that are out there in the world. Please do your own research. You can feel free to start with these professionals that I've shown in my video here. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive of estranged adult children here on my YouTube channel. I really appreciate all the support. So if you like this video, please leave a like. Tell me what you think about this video in the comments of your experience or anything at all. If you made it this far in the video, oh my God, thank you for joining me. If you love the sound of my voice, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you so much for doing that. And until the next time, goodbye.
The whole last movie was a study in trauma.